The garden was quiet when we entered it. That's what stays with me the most. Not the fear, not even the anguish that would follow, but the stillness at the beginning. The city lay behind us, heavy with festive lights and restless voices, but here among the olive trees, the air felt hushed, as though the night itself were holding its breath. Jesus came here often. We all knew that. It was a place he loved, a place of prayer, of reflection, of quiet communion with his Father. But that night something about his steps told me this was different. He walked more slowly. The weight he carried was not physical, yet it bent him all the same. He told most of the others to stay near the entrance. Then he took Peter and James and me further in. I remember the way his voice sounded when he spoke. Not fearful, but strained, as though words themselves were costly now. "Stay here," he said. "Keep watch." I nodded, determined not to fail him again. He moved a little distance away, far enough that his voice carried faintly through the trees, close enough that I could still see him kneel. Moonlight filtered through the branches, casting broken patterns across the ground. The night smelled of earth and oil and crushed leaves beneath our feet. At first he prayed quietly. Then the weight of it seemed to descend all at once. I heard his breathing change. I saw his shoulders begin to shake. His words became urgent, torn from deep within him, spoken to God with a rawness I had never heard before. This was not teaching. This was not instruction. This was agony. He spoke of a cup. I didn't understand then, not fully, but I understand enough to know it terrified him. Whatever lay ahead was not just painful, it was overwhelming. He asked that it might pass from him. There was no shame in the asking. Anyone who says otherwise has never watched love count the cost of obedience. I wanted to move closer. I wanted to say something, but I stayed where I was, rooted by the knowledge that this was a struggle no one else could fight for him. I watched as he prayed again and again. Each time he rose, it seemed to take more effort. Each time he knelt, it was with deeper resolve. I saw sweat gather on his brow, dark even in the dim light, and then, impossibly, it was tinged with red. He was sweating blood. I've seen blood before, plenty of it, but never like this. Not drawn by a whip or a blade, but pressed out by anguish alone. It unsettled me in a way I can't fully describe. This was suffering before suffering. The cross had not yet appeared, and already he was being crushed beneath its weight. Peter and James struggled beside me. Their eyes drooped. Exhaustion claimed them in spite of their intentions. I stayed awake, not because I was stronger, but because I just couldn't look away. Something inside me knew this moment mattered so much more than sleep, more than comfort, more than safety. Jesus returned to us and found them asleep. I braced myself for anger. It did not come. There was disappointment, yes, and sorrow, but no bitterness, only the quiet grief of one who must walk alone what others cannot yet follow. He told them to wake, to pray, to remain alert. Then he went back again. And again he chose obedience. When he returned the final time, something had changed. The anguish had not really vanished, but it had settled into resolve. His face was set now, his posture was steady. The struggle had been real and it had been won. Whatever fear he had carried into the garden did not leave him there, and it no longer ruled him. That was when the sound came. Torches, voices, the clatter of weapons carried on the night air. I stood then, every nerve was alive with dread. The garden that had been a place of prayer was now filling with men who came not to seek God but to seize him. Judas led them, a fact that cut more deeply than any blade possibly could. I watched him step forward. I watched him betray Jesus with a gesture meant only for affection. I could not comprehend what I was witnessing. Jesus, betrayed by a friend, with a kiss. But Jesus did not recoil. He did not curse him. He received the kiss as he received everything else, without resistance, without hatred. When the soldiers moved in, chaos erupted. Someone drew a sword. I saw steel flash, heard a cry of pain. For a heartbeat it felt as though violence might change the course of things. But Jesus stopped it all at once. He healed the wounded man as calmly as he had healed countless others, even as his own freedom was being stripped away. The irony of that struck me like a blow. Mercy extended at the very moment judgment was closing in. They bound him. I will never forget that sight. Hands that had lifted the broken, touched the untouchable, broken bread for us only hours earlier, now tied as though he were a threat to the world that he came to save. The others fled. I can't blame them. Fear surged through me too, sharp and immediate. Every instinct screamed for escape, and yet I stayed. Not close, not yet, but near enough to follow, to watch, to bear witness. As they led him out of the garden, I looked back one more time. The olive trees stood silent again. The ground where he had prayed was dark and trampled. The place where he had chosen obedience was already receding into memory. But the choice he made there would echo far, far beyond that night. The cross did not begin at Golgotha. It began in the garden, when Jesus, fully aware of what awaited him, chose to rise from the ground, wipe the blood from his brow, and walk forward into the hands of those who would execute him. That is where Good Friday truly began. They led him away quickly. The torches moved first, then the soldiers, then Jesus, bound, surrounded, yet strangely unhurried. The night seemed to recoil from what was happening. Shadows stretching long across the path as we descended from the garden toward the city. I followed it as a distance far enough to avoid notice, but close enough that I could not turn away. Fear does strange things to loyalty. I wanted to be braver than I was. I wanted to stand beside him openly, but courage had not yet caught up with love, and love alone had to suffice. They took him then first to those who were already believed that they knew what the verdict was. So accusations obviously flowed freely, each one more desperate than the last. Witnesses contradicted each other. Truth was twisted and pressed and reshaped until it served fear, not justice. And Jesus stood in the centre of it all, silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because nothing he said would be heard. I watched his face as lies were hurled at him, I watched his eyes, steady, sorrowful, unafraid. He was not defending himself, he was offering himself. When the question finally came, the one they believed would force his hand, he answered plainly, yes. He didn't shout it, he didn't embellish it. He spoke truth with a calm that unsettled everyone who heard it. That calm sealed his fate. They struck him then. Hands that trembled with rage delivered blows meant to humiliate as much as hurt. They covered his face and mocked him, daring him to identify his attackers. I clenched my fists until my nails cut into my palms, helplessness burning through my chest. Somewhere nearby a rooster crowed. I saw Peter then, just for a moment, his face pale, his eyes wild with fear and regret. He turned away, broken by words he could never take back. I wanted to reach him, to tell him he was not beyond mercy, but the night moved too quickly for comfort. When morning came, it brought no clarity. They moved Jesus from one authority to another, as though passing responsibility might ease their conscience. He stood before the Roman governor, a man more concerned with order than truth, power than justice. The questions were asked again, the answers changed nothing. Jesus spoke of a kingdom that is not of this world. The governor did not understand him, but he sensed something unsettling in him. I could see it in his eyes. This was no ordinary prisoner, and yet fear of the crowd outweighed fear of God. They offered the people a choice. I still struggle to understand that moment. A man known for violence stood beside Jesus, a proven threat, a known rebel. The choice should have been obvious. But crowds are rarely governed by reason when fear and disappointment have taken hold. They chose death. The sound of their voices still echoes inside me. Not one shout, but many, layered together, feeding on one another until cruelty felt justified. I searched their faces for hesitation. I found none. They whipped him. I turned away at first. I could not bear the sound. Leather striking flesh, breath torn from lungs, pain measured out without mercy. When I looked again, he barely resembled the man I loved. Blood ran freely, his strength ebbed visibly. And still, he did not curse them. They dressed him in mockery, a robe thrown over his torn skin, a crown pressed into his scalp. They laughed as they knelt before him, parodying worship that they didn't understand. Each gesture was meant to strip him of dignity, and they failed. Even in their cruelty, he remained more kingly than they could ever comprehend. "Here is your king," the governor said at last, and the people answered with a cry that chilled my blood. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" In that moment, something inside me fractured beyond repair. The city that had welcomed him days earlier now demanded his death with terrifying certainty. Hope collapsed under the weight of hatred revealed, and they handed him over. They laid the crossbeam across his shoulders and pushed him forward. He stumbled under its weight almost immediately. The flogging had drained him of strength. Blood stained the wood as he fell, struggled and rose again. A man was forced to carry the beam when Jesus could no longer do so. Even then, I saw no resentment in him, only acceptance. We followed as they led him outside the city. The path was familiar, too familiar. Everyone knew where executions took place. Rome made no effort to hide them. Terror is most effective when it's public. The sky darkened as we walked. I do not know if it was weather or an omen, but it felt as though creation itself was grieving. The air grew heavy. The noise of the city faded behind us, replaced by the dull finality of what awaited. I knew then with a clarity that hollowed me out that the garden he had been in the last moment, and this could have gone any other way, but it didn't. Jesus chose to be here. But Jesus hadn't made this happen. This was all the work of his Father. This was all what meant to happen. And because of that, nothing at all would now stop him from walking to the end. They didn't hurry. This is something people often forget. Death, when it is official, is never rushed. The soldiers moved with the ease of men who had done this many times before. They spoke to one another casually as they worked, as though this were no different from any other task assigned to them any other day. But for us, this was the end of everything. They reached the place outside the city, a barren rise of ground, stripped of beauty by reputation. Too many men had died here for the earth to pretend innocence. The wood of the crosses lay ready. The smell of iron and dust clung to the air. Just then Jesus was thrown to the ground. I'll never forget the sound of his body that it made as it struck the earth, the dull, final thud of a man already broken. They stretched his arms along the beam, pressed him down as though he might resist, but he didn't. When the first nail was driven through his wrist, his cry tore through me. It was sharp, involuntary, and unmistakably human. Anyone who claims he felt no pain was not there. His body convulsed, blood flowed freely, his breath came in ragged gasps, and still he did not curse them. They raised the cross with brutal force, dropping it into place so that the full weight of his body hung upon the nails. His chest strained with every breath. Each movement was agony. Breathing itself became an act of endurance. 2 others were crucified with him, one on either side. Their cries filled the air with rage and despair, a chorus of pain Rome had heard countless times before. Jesus hung between them in silence, his head bowed, his strength ebbing. The soldiers settled in to wait. They gambled for his clothing, laughing, arguing, utterly detached from the suffering above them. The crowd watched, some jeering, some shaken in silence, some already wishing they'd never come. I stood at a distance at first, unable to move any closer. Then I saw her, Mary. His mother stood near the cross. Her face was pale, her body held upright by grief alone. No scream escaped her lips, no collapse, just a sorrow too deep for any sound. Something in me broke right then. I moved closer, drawn by love, which was stronger than fear. Jesus lifted his head with effort and looked at her. Even then, even there, his concern was not for himself. He looked at his mother, then he looked at me. Our eyes met, and in that moment he entrusted her to my care. No long explanation, no ceremony, just love given deliberately, even at the edge of death. I nodded, tears blurring my sight. I would do it. I would not fail him. Darkness crept across the sky right then. Not the gentle dimming of evening, but a heavy, unnatural darkness that pressed down on everything beneath it. The mocking stopped. Unease rippled through the crowd. Some shifted nervously. Others backed away. This was not normal. Jesus spoke again, words torn from lungs, burning for air. He spoke forgiveness. He spoke promise. He spoke to God with the intimacy of a son, even as he carried a loneliness none of us could ever fathom. Time lost its meaning. Minutes stretched unbearably long. Pain accumulated without relief. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath our feet. And then he cried out, not in defeat, but in anguish that reached beyond words. I watched his body sag. His breathing slowed. With one final, deliberate breath, he spoke again, quietly now, words that did not sound like surrender, but like completion. Then his head fell forward, and the world changed forever. For a moment, nobody moved. Even the soldiers froze. Death always brings silence with it, even to those who deal with it every day. The crowd's noise stopped, was replaced by shock and dread. The wind stirred dust at our feet, but nobody spoke. Jesus was dead. A soldier approached the cross, methodical, unfeeling. He did not need to check, but he did anyway. He thrust his spear into Jesus' side. Blood and water flowed freely. Final, undeniable proof. I turned away not because I doubted what I saw, but because the finality of it crushed something inside me. There would be no last miracle, no sudden reversal, no voice calling him back. The king we had followed was dead. Slowly the crowd dispersed. Some were left shaken, some hurried away, desperate to escape the weight of what they had witnessed. A few lingered, staring as though trying to understand how the day had gone so incredibly wrong. The soldiers grew bored. Death, once confirmed, loses its fascination. I remained. Mary remained. As the afternoon wore on, others came, men who had followed Jesus quietly, cautiously, from the edges. Time pressed on. The Sabbath was near. His body could not remain on the cross, so they took him down carefully. I helped where I could, my hands trembling as they touched his broken body. Death had made him heavy in a way life never was. This was not sleep. This was absence. We wrapped him in linen quickly but tenderly. There was no time for proper preparation, no time for any ceremony. Grief would have to wait. Love had to work. They laid him in a nearby tomb, one borrowed, cut into some stone. I watched as they placed him inside, as light gave way to darkness once more. The stone was rolled across the entrance. The sound of it settling echoed longer than it should have. And then there was nothing. No angels, no voices, no explanation, just silence. We left as evening fell. Jerusalem was already preparing for the Sabbath. Lamps were being lit, families gathered, prayers were spoken. The world went on. But for us, time had stopped. That night was the longest night of my life. Sleep just didn't come. Every memory of him pressed in at once. His laughter, his teaching, the way he looked at people as though he could see into their souls and loved them anyway. I did not yet know what Sunday would bring. None of us did. I only knew that on Friday, that Friday, the light had gone out of the world, and all that remained was grief, silence, and a love that refused to let go, even when hope itself lay sealed behind a stone. That was Good Friday, not because it felt good, but because what was finished there would one day be understood as the greatest act of love the world has ever known.